Team 1, Berlin International School, Germany. Our members are
Zoe Höche,
Anna Raven,
Ella Lerner,
Lilian Schrimpf,
and Claire Watts.
The first short answer question asks why Meta's asymmetric pricing is profit maximizing. To understand this, we first have to define a two-sided market. A two-sided market is when a platform serves two distinct customer groups who each gain value from interacting with the other group through the platform. Meta, in this case, serves two distinct customer groups, the users and advertisers on their platforms, Instagram and Facebook. Each gain value from the other's presence on the platform. A cross-sided network effect occurs when the value of one group gets from a platform rises as the number of participants on the other group increase. So more users are a more valuable audience for advertisers. The key asymmetry in this case is that users generate a strong positive externality for advertisers because a bigger audience is more value for advertisements. Advertisers, on the other hand, generate little to no direct benefit for users. Meta subsidizes users and charges advertisers because user demand is highly price sensitive. Charging users risks losing the audience that makes the platform valuable to advertisers and therefore profitable at all in the first place. Advertiser demand, on the other hand, is less elastic and depends on user volume, with no comparable substitute for Meta's scale or targeting. This means their price is set above marginal cost.
Question 2 examines how detailed data allows advertisers to pay significantly more through behavioral data. So detailed data allows specific targeting of specific segments and specific demographics that they want to achieve. This makes ads become more valuable and productive, increasing marginal revenue per product, and therefore their ads become more efficient as they target specifically the consumers they want to attract. This reduces uncertainty, information asymmetry, as they know everything they need to about their consumers, and therefore the risk of their advertisement failing. This offers price discrimination in the market of advertising, as there's a different willingness to pay for a different amount of detail in your data. This leads to a market failure as these oligopolies create a monopoly power, which leads to an allocative inefficiency and a risk of collusion. This is due to them setting a price above marginal cost as the demand increases due to the increased marginal revenue, which increases the demand and pushes up the price, and this leads to higher prices from the market price setters, and this reduces output and lowers consumer surplus, leading to the welfare loss shown in the diagram.
Question 3 examines how information asymmetry causes users to overstate the true consumer surplus of free platforms, creating a welfare loss. The actual effective price of using social media is not zero like users perceive. The effective price is time spent, attention, and data collected, which produces advertising revenue for social media platforms, and this is represented by the horizontal line P effective. Because users think they're using the platforms for free and information asymmetry, they overconsume these services shown by demand curve D perceived, which sits right of D true, the lower demand of these services if users had full information. As a result, the market quantity of time spent exceeds the informed quantity of time spent. There is an overestimated perceived consumer surplus because of the very low perceived price, and this is shown by the orange triangle, when the true consumer surplus is much smaller than the true demand, at the true demand, and this is shown by the blue triangle. The green outlined area is the gap between the overestimated and the true consumer surplus, which is essentially the deadweight loss caused by this information asymmetry. Users as a group are likely to receive positive net surplus overall because the service has real value of socializing and education, but that surplus is systematically smaller than it appears. Therefore, user platform use is unlikely to reflect true preferences since the users are not provided full information and obviously overconsume as a result.
So the problem we're looking at is the negative consumption externalities that come from social media consumption. The harms we're trying to solve is the reduced attention span, addiction, correlation to adolescent mental health struggles, which can include depression and anxiety, which weaken the future labor force. This is a welfare loss. And this could then lead to less productive workers and reducing economic output. It's also hard to regulate because social media use affects every user differently. There's also information asymmetry, where users do not know what information is being collected, which could also lead to them being taken advantage of. There's a profiling and loss of digital privacy as well, and it can be used to identify and exploit individual user vulnerabilities, for example, a third-party data loss. These welfare losses equal negative externalities and also deadweight loss. So this first solution we came up with is the data minimization and structural separation. This is a combination of A, data minimization, where platforms only collect minimum data necessary for the core social service, behavioral profiling for ad targeting, and being banned. D is then a structural separation where platforms above a size threshold must legally separate their social networking operations from their advertising business. It works because A shrinks the pool of data platforms that the platforms can legally collect, which limits how precisely they can profile and target users. D then removes the incentive for the social side to maximize addictive engagement purely to feed ad business, since the two are no longer the same company. The U.S. federal judge ruled that Google unlawfully kept monopolies in ad tech stack, and Department of Justice proposed divestiture of Google's ad exchange. This is used as evidence, with DOJ arguing that structurally changing the economic incentives that Google operates its ad tech business by will give market participants the assurance they need to act. The European Commission separately also issued a €2.96 billion fine with the same warnings attached as the DOJ's position. EU officials state that structural separation is likely endgame, arguing that the stack cannot be resolved solely through behavioral remedies. The same underlying logic is used in the hybrid solution.
This solution also allows a list of pros and cons. For example, it attacks the actual root cause of the problem, such as data concentration and market power, rather than a proxy, such as engagement time. It also reduces the information asymmetry between platform and user, and it could also increase competition in the ad market if ad inventory must be offered more openly to competing firms. This is as it reduces self-preferencing, as the company doesn't prefer its own advertising firm. The necessary trade-offs are however strong, such as the necessary for core service from segment A is hard to define, as there's no clean legal line, and this can lead to years of court battles. Who owns what data is also undefinable and leads to a structural separation, which requires a court to decide where one legal entity ends and another begins. This leads to a very opportunity cost, as it takes years of litigation before any welfare gain can materialize, in comparison to a tax that takes effect almost immediately. There's also loss of allocative efficiency when the two firms separate, and this means a loss of innovation, which denies one of the constraints that the recommendation must satisfy, which is the first one. So it's a loss of innovation and also leads to high costs, such as they lose economies of scale. There's the social negative externalities may continue to prevail, as addiction and mental health may continue to struggle because social media is still used. So in solution, the solution one is the most theoretical direct attack on the negative externalities, but is the least realistic to implement.
So the solution is displayed on the graph, showing the negative externality of social media consumption after the separation and minimization. So the MSC shifts left due to this, and the social cost obviously lowers, and the equilibrium quantity is pushed from QN to Q star, which is the optimum, and the quantity of content consumed is then shifted to the socially optimal level, where welfare loss is then minimized.
Solution 2 is neutralizing the default setting combined with the residual attention levy to correct both the behavioral manipulation and the externality which remains afterwards, which aligns with BMC from the case study. So economic theory assumes that demand reflects what people actually want. However, the social media platforms propose a default, the personalized algorithmic feed. This produces an engagement level which is not deliberately chosen by the user and is a manipulated choice architecture, which is the targeted content with which the users automatically engage with from this algorithm, and is higher than the user's real demand. In behavioral economics, we learned that the default option causes a lot of users to stick with that option regardless of what they may choose if they had to actively choose a setting rather than being offered this default one. This is a rational response to the cost of decision making, which is time and effort in evaluating what to choose. The policy has two components, and what's assumed behind it is that A, most users do not actively switch away from a preset default, and that B, personalization, not user preference, is the primary driver of excess engagement. Component 1 is making a chronological feed the default for all users. Whatever is most recently posted is what the users see, not in the order of what the algorithm predicts the users would interact with the most. Additionally, we would still offer personalized algorithmic feed only through explicit opt-in and not automatically. The explicit opt-in is maintained through no reprompting after the decline of the personalized feed, as to not pressure the user into opting in. This would apply to all users, new and old, so the settings would reset for everyone and everyone would receive the single opt-in options. The second component is a tax on all platform advertising revenue, but only on the revenue from the users who opted in for the personalized algorithm. This would incentivize the firms to pursue the socially optimal level of engagement rather than the profit maximizing one, which would reduce the externality. The tax would be calibrated depending on the average daily time the opted-in users spend on each platform, and the revenue would be put towards public fund for digital literacy and mental health programs, which would likely offset welfare loss.
The diagram on the left shows the default reset, where D actual is the personalized default, and it lies further right than D true, which is the user's actual preference. As the policies implemented, the demand curve shifts left from D actual to D true, closing the gap of excess engagement from the default option. The quantity then falls from Q1 to Q2 when the time spent on a platform decreases. The price stays constant at 0 because platforms are technically free to users. The graph on the right shows the tax. Excessive engagement creates external costs, therefore MSC lies above MPC. The MPC shifts left as the tax is implemented up to MPC plus tax, which is closer to MSC, but still lies below it. Reducing engagement drops the quantity, the time spent on the platform among users who have opted in down to Q2, and the price increases from P1 to P2. Q2 remains above Q star, so some of the externality remains and also some of the welfare loss remains.
Our proposition aligns with the nudge theory, and therefore the example we chose is organ donation to support this. So people's inertia leads to lack of donations, and it was proven that when donating becomes inherently opted in and you would have to opt out of being an organ donor, donation percentages went up. And a similar study on TST done by Ivanov et al. Produced the same results. The trade-offs of our policy is that establishing a chronological feed using slight curations and tracking time on the platform, especially to personalized feed, is hard to measure and to regulate. Additionally, platforms would have the incentives to not fully follow the chronological algorithm, or even much worse, downgrade the suitability of the chronological options so that users are more attracted to opting in. Additionally, there would also be enforcement costs, and the tax burden may fall onto users through premium options.
Our third and final solution proposes a data-weighted attention tax, which is a hybrid of methods A and C. C is a tax imposed on the platform revenue based on an average daily time on the platform per user, of which the proceeds are directed to a public fund for digital literacy and or mental health programs. A, on the other hand, suggests that platforms may only collect the minimum user data necessary to provide the core social service. Behavioral profiling for advertising targeting is prohibited. The idea for the A and C hybrid is that we limit both the time spent on the app and the data collected by taxation of user time, which is what C proposes, but proportionally increasing the tax with how personalized the feed is that the time was spent on by the user, which aligns with the aims of A to limit detailed user profiling. So in the original C idea, tax would equal time on the platform times a flat tax rate. However, in our hybrid idea, the tax would equal the time on the platform times the rate that scales up with the personalization intensity of the platform. This targets the market failure and reduces welfare costs by the tax matching the size of the negative externality per unit of consumption, therefore also reducing risk of over or under correction, and it directly targets a real driver of harm, the data collection intensity, by directly discouraging personalized and addictive content through data collection. This is the graph that illustrates the following issue. Negative externality of the social media consumption before and after the tax. Before the tax, MSC is to the right because MPB is greater than MSB, this gap being the user private benefit of scrolling exceeding the benefit of society, which means that the quantity the market operates at is above the Q star, which is the optimum quantity. However, with the tax, MSC shifts left because it makes the supply of content costlier, therefore pushing down the equilibrium towards Q star, minimizing the welfare loss. This is our strongest option because Our solution 2, B and C, is realistic and cheap, but a shallow way of tackling this issue, while solution 1, A and D, attacks the real problem but fails proportionality. This solution takes A's target, the data-driven personalization, and pairs it with C's tool of taxation instead of a legislative ban to directly discourage the harmful behavior of deprofiling, but still remain administrable without new legislation. The pros of this are that it is a direct target of the harmful data collection, it's administrable, it has a low exiting risk of firms, it's proportionate, and it generates government revenue for mitigation. However, there are still some cons to think about. The design is much harder than that of a flat tax because the proportions must be defined. It requires ongoing monitoring, and the platform could theoretically keep collecting as much data as before and simply absorb the higher tax, which discourages but doesn't cap the harmful behavior.
In conclusion, B and C are realistic but cheap. A and D target the real problem but are unworkable. Therefore, our recommendation of A and C provide a hybrid. The strongest policy borrows A's target without A's method and C's tool without C's imprecision.